Election denier. It's a term that has become increasingly common in our political discourse. It's a term we hear a lot these days, especially in the wake of recent elections that have been highly contentious and polarizing. It describes someone who refuses to accept the results of a legitimate election, often without substantial evidence to support their claims. They often claim widespread fraud or manipulation, suggesting that the electoral process has been compromised in some way. Usually we associate this term with Republicans, particularly in the context of the 2020 presidential election. But the truth is, election denial is a bipartisan issue that transcends party lines. Both Democrats and Republicans have questioned election results throughout history, casting doubt on the integrity of the electoral process. This essay will explore instances where both parties have cast doubt on election outcomes, highlighting the bipartisan nature of this issue. We'll look at specific examples from the 2000, 2004, 2016, and 2020 elections, examining the circumstances and claims made during these periods. Understanding these events is crucial for grasping the broader implications of election denial. It reminds us that questioning election integrity is not a partisan issue, but rather a challenge that affects the entire democratic system. It's a problem that threatens the very foundation of American democracy, undermining public trust and confidence in our electoral institutions. The 2000 presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore was one for the history books. It all came down to Florida. The margin of victory was razor thin. A recount was demanded. Democrats cried foul. They questioned the validity of the vote count.
I disagree with the court's decision and the way it reached that decision.
Al Gore himself famously said, "I disagree with the court's decision and the way it reached that decision." His supporters echoed his sentiments. They felt the election had been stolen. The controversy surrounding this election highlighted the deep partisan divide in the country. Fast forward to 2004, a pivotal year in American politics. Incumbent President George W. Bush faced off against Democratic challenger John Kerry in a highly contentious race. While the margin of victory was larger this time compared to the 2000 election, doubts and controversies still lingered in the air. Some Democrats once again questioned the legitimacy of the election results, raising their voices in protest. They raised significant concerns about voting irregularities, particularly focusing on the state of Ohio, which played a crucial role in the election outcome.
The right of citizens to vote is a fundamental right that underpins our democracy, and we in the Congress have a moral obligation to ensure that right is protected and upheld at all costs.
Senator Barbara Boxer, a Democrat from California, even went as far as to challenge the electoral results from Ohio, citing numerous irregularities. She passionately stated, "The right of citizens to vote is a fundamental right that must be fiercely protected. And we in the Congress have a moral obligation to ensure that right is protected, leaving no stone unturned." Her actions, while ultimately unsuccessful in changing the outcome, demonstrated the deep mistrust and concerns some Democrats still harbored about the integrity of the electoral process. This episode highlighted the ongoing challenges and debates surrounding election security and voter confidence in the United States. The 2016 election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton was arguably one of the most contentious in recent history. Following Trump's victory, many Democrats alleged Russian interference. They claimed that Russia had actively worked to influence the election in Trump's favor.
Vladimir Putin is not my friend. He is a thug and a dictator.
The Steele dossier, a collection of intelligence reports alleging ties between the Trump campaign and Russia, added fuel to the fire. While the dossier remains a topic of debate, it further fueled the narrative that the election was somehow illegitimate. This led to calls for investigations and fueled deep distrust in the outcome.
Section 5. The Biden laptop controversy of 2020.
The 2020 election, which saw Joe Biden defeat Donald Trump, was not immune to accusations of impropriety. The Biden laptop controversy emerged in the weeks leading up to the election. It involved a laptop belonging to Biden's son, Hunter. The laptop allegedly contained compromising information about Joe Biden. Initially, many in the media dismissed the story as Russian disinformation. Social media platforms even suppressed its spread. However, the story gained traction and raised questions about whether the media had unfairly interfered in the election. This fueled skepticism among some about the validity of the election results. Section 6. Both sides of the aisle, sowing seeds of doubt. As we've seen, both Democrats and Republicans have contributed to the problem of election denial. When one side loses, it's easy to cry foul. It's easy to point fingers and allege wrongdoing, but this behavior has dangerous consequences. Constantly sowing seeds of doubt erodes public trust in our democracy. It undermines the very foundation of our system of government. When people lose faith in the electoral process, they lose faith in the system as a whole. Section 7. The importance of trust in elections. Trust is the cornerstone of any democracy. For a democracy to function effectively, citizens must trust that their votes count. They need to believe that the electoral process is fair and accurate. Without this trust, our system of government begins to crumble. When we constantly question the legitimacy of elections, we chip away at this vital trust. We create a climate of cynicism and apathy. This makes it harder to address the very real challenges facing our nation. Section 8. The dangers of eroding public trust. Eroding public trust in elections has dire consequences. When citizens lose faith in the electoral process, the very foundation of democracy is at risk. It can lead to political instability, as the legitimacy of elected officials is questioned. When people believe the system is rigged, they are less likely to accept election outcomes. This skepticism can spread rapidly, fueled by misinformation and partisan rhetoric. This can lead to protests, unrest, and even violence. The streets can become battlegrounds, with citizens clashing over perceived injustices. Decreased voter turnout is another consequence. When trust is low, people may feel their vote doesn't matter. If people don't trust the process, they may feel discouraged from participating. This apathy can be particularly damaging in close elections where every vote counts. This can skew election results and further erode faith in democracy. A cycle of distrust and disengagement can take hold, making it harder to achieve fair representation. Additionally, there's the weakening of democratic institutions. These institutions rely on public confidence to function effectively. Constant attacks on the legitimacy of elections undermine the institutions responsible for conducting them. Election officials and workers face increased scrutiny and pressure. This weakens their authority and effectiveness. When these institutions falter, the entire democratic system is at risk. It's clear that maintaining trust in our electoral process is not just a matter of civic duty, it's essential for the survival of our democracy. Every citizen has a role to play in upholding the integrity of our elections. Section 9. Safeguarding democracy, a shared responsibility. Protecting our democracy is not a partisan issue, it's a patriotic duty. We all have a role to play in safeguarding the integrity of our elections and ensuring that every vote counts. This includes rejecting misinformation. Be critical of what you see and hear, especially online. Verify information before sharing it. Supporting election security measures is also crucial. Advocate for measures that make it harder to tamper with elections, such as paper trails and secure voting machines. And finally, holding elected officials accountable. Demand that our leaders uphold the sanctity of our elections and refrain from making baseless accusations of fraud. Section 10. Promoting election integrity and transparency. Building trust in our elections requires a commitment to both integrity and transparency. This means ensuring that elections are conducted fairly and accurately, and that the results are verifiable and trustworthy. We can achieve this by expanding voter access. Make it easier for all eligible citizens to register to vote and cast their ballots. Modernizing election infrastructure is also key. Invest in secure and reliable voting systems that are less vulnerable to hacking and manipulation. Promoting voter education is another important step. Educate citizens about the electoral process, their voting rights, and how to identify and report any irregularities. Section 11. A call for unity and civil discourse. Perhaps the most important step in combating election denial is to engage in respectful and productive dialogue. We need to listen to each other, even when we disagree. We need to find common ground and work together to strengthen our democracy. Divisiveness and distrust only serve to weaken us. It's time to come together as Americans and reaffirm our commitment to the principles of democracy. Let's ensure that our elections reflect the will of the people and pave the way for a brighter future.